Hello and welcome once more to RMTV, the online station that brings RMT members up to speed in the industries where they work. This week we've been discussing maritime issues with Stevie Todd, the National Secretary of the Union, and I began by asking him the significance of the decision by Merizon to pull out of the Isle of Man Liverpool route after a sustained campaign in defence of the Isle of Man steam packet by the Union and its members.
Yeah, well, that's very, very pleasing news, Derek, and it's as a result of a member-led campaign. Obviously, success of that will only, be measured in the course of time. That at this moment in time, it relieves the immediate pressure on the Isle of Man steam packet and the immediate pressure on our members' jobs over there. And it is great news. It sends out a clear message to other operators who want to try and come and do the same. If you come in and try and do this with low cost wages for seafarers and undercutting the Isle of Man steam packets, we'll launch a campaign against any company that does that. And we will take our foot off the gas because, whilst this is successful as it is, there's still a job of work to be done here. Because we've, known for quite some time now that workers across there are not protected by the same rights as workers on the UK mainland, i.e. TUPE, transfer of undertakings, protection of employment regulations, pensions, all other employment stuff, what we would enjoy normally on the UK mainland. We've got to get that right on the Isle of Man so that we don't have problems in taking cases for our members in the future. So whilst the success of that has got to be hailed as a good campaign and a successful campaign, we've still got the job of work to do with regards to the other employment rights for our seafarers over there. And we won't take our foot off the gas until we're successful at that. And we'll continue with the postcard campaign and continue with the pressures on the Manx government. They've done very, very little to help in this matter, in my view. And I think they could have done a lot more to assist the Isle of Man steam packet in the early days of this campaign. So, yeah, successful in one stage, but still a job of work to be done, and we've got to keep at it.
Well, that's great news, Steve. And there's also some good news to report on the whole question of the Race Relations Act and the fact that the government's been dragged kicking and screaming down the road of at least outlawing pay discrimination for some seafarers in UK waters. Can you explain what it is the government is going to have to implement and why, and the truth behind the shipping minister's attack on the union?
Well, one thing first of all, Derek, is they're going to implement the bare minimum. That's quite clear to us. But it is a step in the right direction, and what it will mean, it will end discrimination for seafarers on UK flag vessels. But had the government taken the opportunity to implement the 2009 draft regulations which we put forward, they would have had an opportunity, a golden opportunity, to outlaw discrimination on other flag vessels serving out of UK ports. So, whilst it stops discrimination on UK flag vessels for all EU seafarers, it doesn't go far enough. But it's a step in the right direction. Now let's look at why in the start of this, why they had to do this. They've only done it as a result of the constant lobbying and campaign led by RMT and Nautilus over at the European Commission. And had we not followed through that campaign at the Commission, they would never have even implemented anything of this. They've totally ignored the Carter report. They've put it to one side. It was commissioned by them, commissioned by the government. So they've had an opportunity there to go further, and they're just going to implement the bare minimum. That's okay, in one respect, it's good news for us that they're going to do something, but it still doesn't go far enough. Now, the attack what he launched on the union the day after he told us he was going to implement the bare minimum was a very, very unnecessary attack and wild of the truth. Because he stands and accuses the RMT of wanting to do the red ensign. He's totally wrong, because he's just looking at that from a pure politician's perspective. We're concerned about this red ensign as much as anybody else. I've had 39 years involvement with it, my family before me, and now my sons after me, and other seafarers. So the last thing the RMT wants to be doing is doing the red ensign. Had they implemented the 2009 regulations, it would have created a bigger level playing field. And he still has the opportunity to do that. He still has the opportunity to go one step further. But he's doing it kicking and screaming, as you described, as a result of the campaign and the lobby of the EU Commission, led by us.
So the long and the short bit, Steve, is that had they implemented the recommendations of Carter and the draft regulations that been bequeathed to them by the last government, there would be no question of any advantage for any other EU states. Absolutely not. And what we've got to try and do, they would have removed that advantage to other EU states. So it would have created a level playing field, a wider level playing field for them in the UK. And the UK ship owners wouldn't have had as much concern as what they expressed to have. But the last thing RMT wants to do is frighten people away from the UK flag. But at the same time, we don't want it used as a cloak of respectability for people to hide behind. So, at the end of the day, they've had their opportunity.
They've still got the opportunity, in my view, to do more, but he's telling us that he can only do the bare minimum because of the backbenchers and because of the pressure you'll get from the industry. Well, what does that tell you? The industry is still pulling the strings.
Indeed. Now, there's another issue where the union is having to step up campaigning, because while RMT's campaign has prevented the privatisation of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, of course the pressures of the massive cuts that are being brought in right the way across the economy mean that we've got 3 vessels under threat of being decommissioned by the RFA. Bring us up to speed on that, Steve.
Yeah, we've had informal discussions with the company so far, Derek, and everything's been on a very informal basis because they're still trying to do their number crunching, and that's what it's all about. The 3 vessels are going to lay up as a result of the lack of Royal Navy vessels to supply to. But our argument with the RFA at the moment is this: you've got to have a 10% cost saving in place, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say 10% jobs. The cost savings could be sought elsewhere. There are other ways and means. It doesn't say you've got to have a 10% reduction in the workforce. And even if we accepted there was a 10% reduction in the workforce, 10% of the RFA ratings employed by RFA is 150. So there's a lot of talk at the moment about there could be 400 redundancies. That may well be the case, but that would be 400 across the piece in RFA. That would be shore-based workers, officers and ratings. But as I said before, 10% of 1,500 who they employ for us is no more than 150. And everything we've said to them all the way along is that you've got to ensure that every ship is fully manned to its full capacity before we even sit down and talk to you. And I think this is what the delay is. They're going through the numbers, they're going through the reconfiguration of the vessels, and they're trying to find out where and how. So there has been no formal notification, no formal notice of anything served upon the union as yet. Everything's all been done through the informal basis. So we're not even in the consultation process yet. And even if they did those cuts tomorrow, they couldn't do it overnight, because you would leave the ships undermanned and in a very dangerous position. Those cuts do not have to be achieved by all those job losses. They can be achieved by other measures, in my view. And we've said quite clearly to the company, we're not in the business of accepting any compulsory redundancies, and everything must be done through either natural wastage or the voluntary early exit scheme which exists. And that's still not even finalised yet. So if they started tomorrow by giving us formal notification and having the formal consultation, that would take another 3 months. So we're talking the back end of the year at least before we look at anybody going. But I've made it quite clear to our members when we've been visiting ships, and I've said to our officers who are visiting, our officials who are visiting ships, make it quite clear to our members, this is not a compulsory situation, and anybody who wants to stay and fight for their job within RFA, the RMT is going to be right behind them.
And there's also a political campaign being launched as well with postcards, early day motion.
Yeah, the postcards and the early day motion, they're all helpful. As we've seen in the value for money review, we were successful in seeing that off, and that is a result of the efforts of our parliamentary lobbyists, you know, and the people we depend on very heavily there. This postcard campaign has got to be followed through to the joint postcard campaign between RMT and Nautilus, you know, but we've got to keep our focus on. That is a big campaign for us. Just because the value for money thing is gone doesn't mean to say that the campaign's over and that you've got to take the pressure off. You've got to keep every political pressure and every industrial pressure you can on.
Indeed. So obviously members who get their postcards should make sure they fill them in, get their friends to do it and get those in.
Well, we're encouraging members, Derek, to get postcards, not just for themselves, get them to their neighbours, get down the streets, give them out as if it was an election campaign. Go knocking on the door with them and give them to your neighbours.
But if you can just turn very briefly to the situation with Caledonia and the rain. Some bad weather at the back end of last year put paid to public meetings, but we've got one back on in Barra.
Yeah, the General Secretary, Bob, will go over there on the 28th of the month. There'll be a public meeting in the evening time. I understand a number of our CalMac workforce will be at the meeting, but we're inviting all the public down to this meeting so that the RMT can put its point of view across and to gather some support from the communities. We've not taken our eye off the ball with this. It was the bad weather that put paid to it, and the meetings are back up and running, and this is the first one. I think Bob's concerned that, you know, we've already had to cancel Barra twice for weather reasons, and he didn't want to miss the opportunity again, so he's going to go ahead with it on the 28th. And I'm hoping that people will come out to that, members will get their friends and their family to come along to that meeting as well, and hear the point of view of what RMT's got to say, and others who come along as well.
Well, great, Steve. A lot of campaigning work to be done. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Derek.